Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the contrast between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's reception at the Munich Security Conference and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's, with AOC advocating for working-class-centered politics and foreign policy, while Rubio moved on from Munich to Hungary to praise their kleptocratic authoritarian leader Orban as, quote, essential to U.S. interests, and hailed a golden era of relations as he desperately tried to help Orban, who's 10 points behind in the upcoming April elections. Joining us to discuss how even right-wing parties in Europe are distancing themselves from Trump and the possibility of AOC running for president is Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor at the National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Last, The Right's Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators. And he's also editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. Then we'll look into the possibility that Trump's top-down fascism could meld with bottom-up authoritarianism from America's police forces and police unions, and speak with Stuart Schrader, a professor of history and director of the program in racism, immigration, and citizenship at Johns Hopkins University. His research focuses on security, policing, and counterinsurgency, the entwinement of foreign and domestic policy, and urbanization, and he's the author of Badges Without Borders, How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing, and his forthcoming book, Blue Power, How Police Organize to Protect and Serve Themselves. And we will discuss his article at the New York Review of Books, Authoritarianism from Below. Then finally we'll assess the impact of an AI-generated video of Tom Cruise battling Brad Pitt, which has Hollywood's creative community alarmed that the writing is on the wall that they could be replaced by AI, which has billions pouring in from Wall Street while Silicon Valley billionaires buy up the media. Joining us is Jonathan Handel, a lawyer and journalist who practices transactional entertainment and technology law, who was formerly a professor at UCLA School of Law and was a contributing editor for The Hollywood Reporter. He is a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, and his most recent book is Entertainment Residuals, a Full-Color Guide. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now, Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor at the National Interest and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Last, The Right's Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators, and he's also editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jacob Heilbrunn.
Thank you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And what do you make of the emergence of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the global stage at the Munich conference? Now, she spoke earlier than Rubio's keynote speech, I guess, if that's what it was. She spoke on Friday, where she pitched working-class-centered politics, but there was a lot of American senators and congresspeople there, probably in a way to make up for Trump. But the general reading that I'm getting here is that people are starting to wonder about her possibly even as a presidential candidate. So she seems to have really distinguished herself and certainly came across as a complete contrast to Marco Rubio, whose speech was well accepted, but I think largely out of relief than any of its great content.
I thought it was a breakout moment for AOC. She delivered a compelling talk about why Trump is wrecking the Western alliance, and it served as an excellent prelude as well to Hillary Clinton's remarks about how Trump is single-handedly demolishing the Western alliance and trying to curry favor with authoritarians, which was the theme of AOC's talk as well. So I think AOC is a likely presidential candidate and could be the kind of charismatic candidate that the Democrats need coming up in the next election.
Well, it's worth noting that after Rubio spoke at Munich, he then moved on to Slovakia to meet with Fico, who's a complete crook, a pro-Putin crook. And then, of course, and now, he's with Viktor Orban in Hungary, saying that Donald Trump is deeply committed to the Hungarian premier's success ahead of critical parliamentary elections. As it happens, Orban is 10 points behind his challenger in the April vote. So here you have Rubio telling, basically helping out Orban and saying that Orban's leadership is, quote, essential to U.S. interests. So you couldn't have more of an endorsement, right?
I disagree. I think the Trump administration is the kiss of death for these European right-wingers, and some of them are starting to wake up to it. The poll last month by the European Council on Foreign Relations found that only 16% of Europeans consider America to be an ally. J.D. Vance was booed at the Winter Olympics, even though Italy has a Trump-friendly prime minister. So they can try and promote these far-right movements as much as they want, but some of them are now starting to distance themselves from Trump. Orban is behind 10 points, and there's no way that Trump can make him more popular in Hungary. So I think the administration is being hoisted by its own petard. They already got Mark Carney elected in Canada, and I hope they keep it up in Europe.
Well, I was bringing it up because it shows you what the priorities of this administration is. For all of the happy talk about and the relief coming out of the European and NATO leaders, that Rubio's speech was nothing like J.D. Vance's speech a year ago. He shows up then in Hungary, where he really shows where this administration is at, supporting this kleptocratic authoritarian.
Right. I mean, that was the theme of my book about how Trump is the latest representative of the American right's long-standing affinity for authoritarians abroad. And Trump has been leaning on Volodymyr Zelensky to reach an accommodation with Russia and exerting almost no pressure on Russia itself. Next week, the Trump administration is scheduled to meet with the Russians in Geneva, as well as the Iranians. But so far, its diplomacy has gotten nowhere. So Trump, yes, he would love to have an authoritarian's international, but I think people abroad have woken up to the menace that Trump poses. And his right-wing policies simply do not have that much purchase abroad. It really looks like Orban is going to go down in the upcoming April elections.
Well, let's talk a little about then what's happening with the far right in Europe. For example, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, was at the Munich conference. A year ago, J.D. Vance criticized European and NATO leaders for not inviting them in and somehow suppressing the right. And that was his pitch about them being anti-democratic. But they were in appearance there. I don't know exactly what they did. But you just mentioned that a lot of the far-right leaders are distancing themselves from Trump. The AfD has distanced themselves from Trump, criticized him over his land grab or his hope to annex Greenland. So what's going on with them? They seem to have an issue over sovereignty.
Well, the one of the heads of the party over there, Tino Tropula, referred to Trump as creating the Wild West in reference to Greenland with his proposed land grab. So I think, look, Trump's popularity in Germany probably hovers in the low, barely above 10%. I mean, he has single-handedly alienated the United States from Europeans. And for all his claims to be protecting sovereignty, he's extremely intrusive when it comes to other countries. In fact, the State Department is making plans to fund right-wing think tanks and political groups in Europe to promote what it calls free speech. You know, but it hasn't escaped Europeans that he's trying to indict our members of Congress here for exercising their free speech rights. So I think Trump is a poison chalice for the European far right, which it's begun to recognize.
But Jacob, does that extend to anti-Americanism in terms of how the Europeans now see Americans? It's one thing to boo J.D. Vance, but it's another thing to treat all Americans as the ugly American that Trump is.
Well, I think there is going to be blowback even for American tourists. And that's why you have EU Commission head Ursula von der Leyen stating that the alliance, the NATO alliance, the Europeans need to detach themselves from the United States and usher in economic reforms and unify militarily because they can no longer count on the United States. I think the problem with the Trump administration policy is the EU is a bloc of 450 million people with some 18 trillion annually in GDP. And, have we awakened a sleeping giant over there?
Well, Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, said a while back that it's never made any sense that 500 million Europeans depend upon 340 million Americans to defend themselves against 150 million Russians. So where do we stand in terms of the Europeans stepping up because they know what's going on in Ukraine right next door and how dangerous it is to their long-term security or indeed short-term security. So what's happening in terms of the Europeans stepping up? Because on day one, Trump cut off intelligence and arms to Ukraine. And it's been a year. But interesting enough, as far as we can get reports from the battlefront, the Russians have been really suffering massive casualties and the Ukrainians are holding on. So what's happening with the Europeans filling the breach there?
The Europeans have stepped up. Their military aid rose by almost 70%. They have a $90 billion two-year aid package for 2026, 2027 that they've approved. And the United States is nowhere to be seen. So in this sense, it vitiates Trump's ability to dictate the events over there. He's desperate to pressure Zelensky into some kind of bogus peace treaty that he can then wave around before the midterm elections and claim that he, Trump, has single-handedly brought about peace between Russia and Ukraine. It's not going to happen. He has ceded his influence over the conflict. Now, President Macron of France is claiming that the Europeans, within a few months, could supply most of the intelligence information to Ukraine that the United States is currently providing. If so, that's also a good sign. The blunt fact is that if you take Trump seriously, he represents not an ally, but a direct threat to a democratic Europe.
Well, I think they woke up with Davos. I don't know about whether the European leaders so much as the global elite, all the richest people in the world, are sitting there watching after they saw Mark Carney make a very stirring and powerful speech. The next day, Trump made this completely incoherent, rambling, insulting idiocy, and the dollar tanked immediately thereafter. So this would be a combination, right, of Trump's, Kushner, and Witkoff's dead-end diplomacy. They're going to be meeting later in the week in Geneva, but I don't think anybody takes them seriously anymore except Putin. Putin's offering, by the way, $12 trillion deal, a package of investment, etc. You know, the GDP of Russia is $2 trillion. That's 6 years of GDP. Who in the hell's going to take that seriously?
This is a completely fictitious bill. I mean, it's the kind of thing that it's very Trumpian, actually, to make up a bogus proposal and then claim that this is reality. However, reality is catching up to Mr. Trump. Mark Carney, who you mentioned, is deftly assembling an anti-American trade alliance. He's reaching out to China and the Europeans, and the United States is going to be boxed out. What Trump is doing is isolating the United States. He claimed he would usher in a golden age. It looks to me more like a dark age.
So have the Europeans figured out what idiocy it is to have these two real estate developers negotiate for the United States, Witkoff and Jared Kushner? Because I don't see anything coming out. I cannot believe in any way that Zelensky is going to sell out his country to these grifters.
100% the Europeans have figured it out. I mean, it was the Greenland thing, even more than the speech in Davos, that alerted Europeans to the fact that, the United States cannot be relied upon. The other thing is, whatever deals Trump signs, he then tries to modify them down the road, at least when it comes to trade. Now, Kushner and Witkoff are completely out of their depth when it comes. These guys are not diplomats. They're just trying to create the appearance of some kind of a deal. And the deal that they want is obviously an economic one that would benefit them, Trump's cronies, and Trump himself. They're not there to defend American national interests.
So, Jacob, back to AOC and the extent to which she seems to have captured a lot of praise and attention on the global stage at the Munich Security Conference. Also, the Governor of California was there as well, Gavin Newsom, so no question about him being a candidate for president on the Democratic ticket. What's the likelihood of AOC being on the ticket?
The Democrats need someone who's willing to fight and is charismatic, and she fulfills both those counts. And if you also watch her, she's very fluent in the way that she tied together income inequality and the rise of authoritarianism, and arguing that this, in many ways, is responsible for the rise of far-right populism. She said, extreme levels of inequality lead to social instability. And she's absolutely right. And the Democrats need to pound that message home. So I am a fan.
So do you think that AOC, as much as they trashed her and tried to marginalize her and suggest that she's a loony left radical and all the crazy stuff.
Ian, the more they attack her, the more you know that she's hitting home.
What I'm wondering about, though, is do you think the Democrats could, through her as a vehicle, peel off the red states? So much of rural red states, if you look at the history, they're very anti-corporate, and every farmer knows he's being screwed by these big agribusiness companies. And my sense is that they're ripe for the pickings in terms of somebody like AOC that is explaining who the real problems are in this world today, particularly here in the United States. Corporate power, oligarchical power, etc. I think that resonates with a lot of conservative voters.
Yeah, and I think you have to tie it in with the corruption of the Trump regime, that though Trump purports to represent the working class, he is in fact fleecing it. And the billions that he has earned already over the past year, Trump's popularity ratings appear to be crashing. So the likelihood, I think, is that there is going to be a massive wave of revulsion against his presidency, and that it will open the door for the Democrats to push for sweeping reforms, not just of the economy, but also of the American political system.
Well, what I'm suggesting, Jacob, is that could you have on the left, center, and center right, could you have an emerging union between the urban working class and the rural working class that an AOC and the Democrats could inspire?
To do that, I think you would need running on the presidential ticket someone from a southern state. And I'm not sure who that candidate would be. That's, of course, the Democrats don't even need to peel off that much from the rural areas. They just need to peel off a little bit. And that would be devastating to Republican chances.
But are you suggesting that you have to have a man at the head of the ticket, or a Southern man, because women have not been?
I don't think that the Democrats can run a woman at the top of the ticket again. They've tried it twice, and I just don't think, given the stakes, that it's going to happen this time.
So AOC would be a vice presidential candidate, and somebody
Yeah.
else would be. Well, interesting that we that this is all coming out of the Munich Security Conference, and here we are talking about who's running for president. But
I mean, it's very unfortunate, but obviously either Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, that would have been far more competent. But I do think that it is not an accident that they both lost.
well, I thank you for joining us. I appreciate it, Jacob.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jacob Heilbrunn, who's the editor of the National Interest and the non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre and a columnist for The Spectator. His books include They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons, and America Last, The Right's Century-Long Romance with Foreign Dictators. And he's also editor-at-large of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. We're going to take a brief station break and back look into the possibility that Trump's top-down fascism could meld with bottom-up authoritarianism from America's police forces and police unions. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Stuart Schrader, a professor of history and director of the program in racism, immigration, and citizenship at Johns Hopkins University. His research focuses on security, policing, and counterinsurgency, the entwinement of foreign and domestic policy, and urbanization. And he is the author of Badges Without Borders, How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing. And his forthcoming book is Blue Power, How Police Organize to Protect and Serve Themselves. And he has an article in the New York Review of Books, Authoritarianism from Below. Welcome to Background Briefing, Stuart Schrader.
Good to be here again.
Well, thanks for joining us, Stuart. And I assumed that after what we witnessed in Chicago and in particular in Minneapolis, with the brazen shooting by ICE of a woman who was clearly innocent and friendly, and she was shot in the face and brutally murdered by an ICE officer. And then shortly after that, Alex Preddy we saw him be shot 10 times in the back after he'd been disarmed and beaten to the ground by a whole bunch of Border Patrol people. Prior to that, in Chicago, of course, a Border Patrol officer shot a woman 5 times and then bragged about the 7 holes he put in her. So you get the impression, at least I got the impression, that particularly the Border Patrol has a history of brutality going back to its inception, that this would somehow outrage professional policing around the country, and that chiefs of police, etc., would step forward because these cowboys and ruthless clowns in ICE and CBP were giving policing a bad name. But now that I've read your article in the New York Review of Books, I'm not so sure, Stuart.
Well, I think what I would say is that there are some people within the profession of policing, and certainly police leaders in cities like Minneapolis, who have decried these activities by ICE and Border Patrol. They see them as detrimental to the image of law enforcement. But those are not the only voices available within the profession of policing. And what I try to focus on in this article is to say that although, yes, it's true that these chiefs, particularly Chief O'Hara in Minneapolis, have expressed outrage and frankly have been all over the media talking about how outraged they are. That's not the full picture. And in fact, there have been a number of police union officials in cities from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles to Chicago and elsewhere who have seen these urban takeovers by the Department of Homeland Security as moments where they can score political points, wage ongoing political battles with local antagonists, and use the kind of chaos produced by the federal government and by the Department of Homeland Security to their own benefit and to their own ends.
And in particular, you profile Greg Pemberton, right, in Washington, D.C., which, of course, is a city that's been involved in police reform. And why did you choose him?
Well, two reasons. One reason is that Washington, D.C. has a particular political status that is different from other cities across the country. It really is a kind of creature of the federal government. Its, laws, budget, etc., all are not fully under the control of the voters or elected officials of the city because Congress can step in and exercise a kind of veto power. It has not frequently been the case that Congress has overruled city council, but a number of the times it's happened over the course of history, it has actually had to do with questions of law enforcement. So DC is an interesting case where what Greg Pemberton, who is the leader of the local Fraternal Order of Police Lodge in Washington, D.C., what he's been able to do is form a kind of alliance with some very Trump faithful, MAGA conservative members of Congress to organize together against the progressive members of the DC City Council. So that the second reason, therefore, that I focus on DC is that there's been this long-standing, not super long-standing, but certainly since 2020, there's been this really clear effort by City Council to reconfigure, reform, reimagine what law enforcement in the district looks like. On the one hand, there was an effort to rethink and reconfigure the criminal code to remove some antiquated penalties and things like mandatory minimum sentences. And then on the other hand, there's been this police reform measure, which has done a number of things like ban chokeholds, require officers to display their badges or insignia when they're engaged in things like crowd control so that people know which police agency is working. And also, perhaps to the greatest outrage of Pemberton and the FOP, remove questions of officer discipline from the negotiating table when the union negotiates its contract. So this combination of police reform and progressive policy making and the ability of a very conservative police union leader to create alliances with members of Congress to overrule the city council or attempt to overrule the city council really makes it a very interesting test case, because these fights have been going on, as I suggested, for several years. But it wasn't really until the federal takeover that the rhetoric got pitched up to a really high intensity, and Pemberton started to see some really significant gains in his kind of campaign against the city council. Although it was true that a few years ago, as some listeners may remember, Congress did overrule the criminal code revision and turn it down, which was really disastrous because so much time, effort, and man hours, resources had been put into reconfiguring this criminal code, and then it was just thrown in the trash by kind of a thoughtless reactionary congressional initiative.
But your article concludes with what liberals call creeping fascism, that even as the Trump administration embraces authoritarianism from above, in recent months, what's been hiding in plain sight, the jail, the prison, the police stop, the police union, have steadily been strengthening authoritarianism from below. So expand on that, because that is at the heart of your warning. And as again, I suggested perhaps I was naive to think that there was a nationwide movement in reaction and revulsion to what ICE and CBP have been doing, but apparently not. That's not entirely the case.
Yeah, well, I think I'm trying to make two arguments here. One is about how we should understand where authoritarianism in the United States originates, and the other is to try to understand what's going to come after Trump, what's going to come after MAGA, or how will MAGA evolve. So on the one hand, going back to the earliest days of Trump's appearance on the national political scene in 2016, there have been a lot of warnings using the idiom of fascism to say that what Trump was trying to do was implement fascism, or that Trump himself is a fascist, or people around him are fascist. And I'm sympathetic to some of these arguments, but I think that they've gotten there's been a lot of debate around this, and sometimes they've gone off into esoteric directions about the kind of comparison, and how can we make a precise comparison between the United States in 2026 and say interwar Europe, and I think that ultimately that kind of comparison has really distracted us from what some might call, and certainly African American intellectuals have been pointing to as our kind of native fascisms. I think that's a term from Langston Hughes, if I'm not mistaken. There's been a long tradition, and certainly people on the left, particularly black radicals and communists, in the period when fascism was rising in Europe, where they recognized that there was something quite similar in the lynch mob and the sheriff and the jail and so forth in Jim Crow America. So I want to draw on that lesson and say, to the degree that we should be critical of tendencies toward fascism under the Trump administration, and again, this is not to dispute that, but we should see them as not emanating solely from these figures at the top of the administration, but actually that they're kind of consistent with or entangled with much longer traditions of highly localized, small scale forms of authoritarianism. And I think that also helps to see why, even if, obviously Trump is not going to be around forever, and even if the movement that he has, inspired persists, it might evolve, it might change, it might go in different directions, or it might collapse. But the police union, for example, as the kind of main institution that I focus on in this article, the police union will remain extraordinarily powerful at the local and state level in many, many states. It was powerful before Trump, and it will remain powerful after Trump. What's been so interesting to me in my analysis, and I explain this at great length in my new book, Blue Power, that will be out soon, is the degree to which these police union leaders and a lot of members of police unions really saw something in Trump that they wanted to align themselves with. And in fact, despite having a long history of gaining support across the political aisle, many police, really did throw their lot in with MAGA, particularly by the time of 2020 and, Trump's attempted reelection. So I think that we really need to both look backward into U.S. history and also, start to look forward. I mean, the city takeovers, who knows how long they will last? It seems like they're modulating to some degree. They're not disappearing. And I would be skeptical of claims that they're coming to an end. I think the tactics are changing, and the tactics have been different in almost in every city. And there's a lot that is happening really below the radar. But they're not going to continue necessarily forever. But what will remain afterwards? I think the hope of the Trump administration is that sanctuary policies where jails don't turn people over to immigration authorities will be totally eradicated. And that will enable the Trump administration to take people out of jails, as ICE has been trying to do for a couple decades, and put them into detention centers. Not even put them into deportation proceedings, but just put them in detention centers. And it seems like ICE is building massive detention centers, which we could otherwise call concentration camps, all over the country.
So just in the last couple of minutes, though, Stuart, the Fraternal Order of Police Union endorsed Trump twice, in 2016 and in 2024. And the Fraternal Order of Police, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, I take it that they're largely conservative organizations.
Well, I think that they are self-interested organizations, and I think they try to see which way the wind is blowing. But they also are membership organizations, and so the leaders sometimes find themselves to be in a bind where even if they get the sense that, and this was especially true when the conservative movement was much more associated with economic austerity than it is now, but they get the sense that conservative politicians who want to cut budgets might not be the best thing for police departments or really for pensions and other types of benefits that are available to public employees, but their members tend to vote conservative. So they have to deal with that. I think what's been really interesting to note, as I suggested, over the past decade or so with Trump on the political scene, is that the kind of bipartisanship that was frequently the case, at least since the 1990s, among these police organizations has really been eliminated. And now what we're seeing is a kind of full-throated endorsement of the MAGA side of the political spectrum.
But do you think, though, that there is something that can be done to rein in not just ICE and CBP, but police in general in terms of shooting American citizens? When you see them kill people in cold blood, American citizens, in the name of rounding up so-called illegals, you would think that that was a line that was crossed, that all of our society would recognize. And I'm just wondering about what you can build upon here in terms of setting some rules, because there's a lot of immunity and impunity, isn't there?
Absolutely. I think going back to, some of my earlier research, which we've spoken about before, in the late 1960s, there was a concerted effort to kind of change the training and change the tactics of police in protest situations and crowd control situations to avoid killing people who were involved in protests. And that was moderately effective, not completely effective, but relatively effective. And that's part of the reason, although Renee Good and Alex Preti weren't exactly involved in protests, they were involved in what we might call a form of political witness. But, I think that's part of what was so shocking about these incidents that were caught on camera was that it was clear that they were not engaged in violent activities, that they were, just like you say, gunned down in kind of cold blood. And it was surprising because police practices had moved away from that in large part. Now, that doesn't mean that police don't shoot a lot of people. Obviously, they do. The police shootings in this country are horrific, in terms of numbers and severity, but they tend not to happen in these types of what we might call political situations. So some people would say, and I think a lot of police chiefs would say, look, this is evidence that training and reform can fix the problem. But I don't think that, I think the risk here is assuming that these ICE and Border Patrol shootings are the result of inadequate or bad training or, tactics gone awry. That's not how I see them, and I don't think that's how we should see them. And I don't think that means we should, go for the kind of training and reform reflex that is so common. I think we need to understand them as forms of political violence, state violence, but a particular form of political violence enacted by the state. And the answer to that, therefore, is a political answer rather than a kind of technocratic answer or sort of, reconfiguring behind the scenes how some of the training or tactical repertoires work. It's a political question about what exactly is the state for, who does it serve, and what are its ultimate aims and goals. And that is a challenging question to answer, but it will require a mass mobilization to reconfigure the state and push it away from this direction that it's been going in.
Well, Stuart Schrader, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Stuart Schrader, who's a professor of history and director of the program in racism, immigration, and citizenship at Johns Hopkins University. His research focuses on security, policing, and counterinsurgency, the entwinement of foreign and domestic policy, and urbanization. And he is the author of Badges Without Borders, How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing. And his forthcoming book out in April is Blue Power, How Police Organize to Protect and Serve Themselves. And he has an article in the New York Review of Books, Authoritarianism from Below. We're going to take a brief station break and back, assessing the impact of an AI-generated video of Tom Cruise battling Brad Pitt, which has Hollywood's creative community alarmed that the writing is on the wall that they could be replaced by AI, which has billions pouring in from Wall Street, while Silicon Valley billionaires buy up the media. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Jonathan Handel, a lawyer and journalist who practices transactional entertainment and technology law and was formerly a professor at UCLA School of Law and was a contributing editor for The Hollywood Reporter. He is a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and his most recent book is Entertainment Residuals, a Full-Color Guide. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jonathan Handel.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jonathan. And a short video that was posted by an Irish director has gotten millions of views and has absolutely alarmed Hollywood. And it features AI-generated tool, through this AI-generated tool called C-Dance 2.0, a video of Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise fighting in a staged AI battle. It's full of visual effects, really terrible dialogue, needless to say. The fake Brad Pitt says, "You killed Jeffrey Epstein, you animal," sounding exactly like Brad Pitt. "He was a good man." And then the AI-generated Tom Cruise says in Tom Cruise's voices, "He knew too much about our Russia operations. He had to die, and now you die too." So they're not going to win the Best Screenplay Award. But what's going on here? Because this seems to really have alarmed people in Hollywood to the point where they're almost sort of declaring a death sentence on artistry, whether you're an actor, writer, cinematographer, you name it, you can be replaced.
Well, it is creating enormous concern in Hollywood. This is the first steps down the road towards a world in which creating a full-length motion picture through prompts, as well as creating screenplays through prompts, is likely to be possible. Now, what quality and when, are very much open to question. I don't think that the day after tomorrow or even next year you're going to be seeing movies at the Cineplex or on streaming that are full-length movies created in this fashion. But we have to remember 125 years ago, movies didn't start out as 90-minute extravaganzas. They started out as 15-second loops of film, and they're the same length as this digital product. And over time, movies evolved to full-length silent films and then talking films, color, 3D, 70 millimeter, all of that. And digital technology moves a lot more quickly than analog technology does. Movies and television have always been technological industries, but they were analog up until the last several decades. So we are going to see a world, I think, that is not necessarily recognizable, where the divide between professionally produced content and prosumer content, as it were, or consumer content, becomes a blur. And Hollywood is very concerned about that.
Well, Cdance 2.0 is an AI service of ByteDance, a $500 billion Chinese company. They pledged that, and there have been legal threats coming from Hollywood, and they've pledged to curb all AI video generated tools that like Cdance, saying that they respect intellectual property, which is something that the Chinese have not shown any fidelity to for decades. What do you make of the promises coming from ByteDance?
Well, it's kind of a joke. If they wanted to put guardrails in, they could have put guardrails in before releasing the product, but they didn't. This is the Silicon Valley and Chinese approach to break things first and ask forgiveness or pay later. And you mentioned intellectual property rights. We're talking about copyright. We're talking about name, image, and likeness, the so-called right of publicity, and we're talking in some instances about trademark as well when we're talking about particular characters, for example. Also talking about what's called unfair competition, which is sort of a broad concept as well. These are areas of the law that are in flux. The courts that we only have, there have been lawsuits filed over the last several years on generative AI, mostly in the text and image area, but some in the video arena as well. But all we have so far are some very preliminary decisions by those courts, by the lower courts, and until there are more final decisions and then appeals and ultimately decisions by the Supreme Court or action by Congress, we are not going to have a definitive landscape, that would prevent what's going on here. It's troubling. It's difficult because this is a very powerful tool. These are tools that ultimately will be useful, for authorized, for Hollywood and for people who are using authorized intellectual property assets. But you have to look at what's going on. These tools are trained on existing data, existing video, existing images, and so forth. And in most cases, the creators of those existing content were not compensated and are not compensated for the training. Then you get the processing, and then you get the output, some of which, you could imagine the same video, but without famous actors' images, instead with just generic, avatars, generic people. That would still raise concerns in Hollywood because, oh my God, what used to be our monopoly no longer is. But then when you add to it the violation of name, image, likeness, right of publicity, that adds another dimension to it. So the legal issues are complex, is the bottom line, and they relate both to the training data and to the output. And we do not have definitive rulings from the courts on these issues.
So ByteDance owns TikTok, and TikTok is because of concerns here in the United States that the Chinese government were influencing young Americans' minds. It's been sold to Larry Ellison, whose son has CBS Paramount and is trying to get Warner Brothers. And obviously it was his father's money that enabled him to buy CBS and possibly buy Warner Brothers. There's also some reporting that suggests that TikTok is, instead of having the Chinese government influence young Americans, that some of Larry Ellison's right-wing politics are seeping into TikTok. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into that, but I've been seeing reports about that. What is the role of these media monopolies, particularly ones like Paramount and possibly Warner Brothers combined, owned by the third richest or second richest guy in the country?
Second richest guy in the world, in fact.
Yeah.
Well, that adds a level of complexity to it because the tech industry is starting to control aspects of Hollywood. Netflix, of course, one of the largest streamers, the largest streamer being YouTube, both companies with technology roots, not with Hollywood roots. And so it creates a battle of its own on top of the rooftops, frankly, between tech and protection of IP and infringement of IP in many cases, and Hollywood and protection of IP. And where the Ellisons intend to go with this, where they will go with it, remains to be seen. It should be pointed out that as I understand it, that Cdance is a subsidiary of ByteDance, but TikTok, what the Ellisons are controlling now, is an American subsidiary of TikTok that has been, to a large extent, cleaved away from the Chinese company in order to satisfy various foreign control concerns. So it's not clear exactly whether the Ellisons would have any influence in this, and we should be clear that despite the Larry Ellison's son, David Ellison's company is called Skydance, there is no relation to Cdance that we know of, and we should be clear about that.
Right, but it wasn't that long ago, Jonathan, that I was picketing with the Writers Guild and SAG in front of the Fox studios here in Los Angeles, and we were holding up signs warning about AI. And it's happening, isn't it? It's upon us. This video, I think, has quite rightly shaken up Hollywood, and it has a lot of people, well-known writers and directors saying, my God, it's going to be all over for us.
It is upon us. It is the beginning of a road. I mean, a 15-second video is not a 90-minute, 2-hour movie, but that roadway it's clear where this is heading, and it's an enormous concern. And when you combine that with the cut in content spending on as a result of the streaming wars and COVID and the strikes, I mean, Hollywood right now is not in a good way economically, and frankly that has nothing whatsoever yet to do with AI. It has to do with streaming technology. It has to do with COVID and the strikes and the marketplace, the stock market view of Hollywood, and the people turning away from the cinemas in large part and watching stuff on streaming, watching YouTube. So, when you take where Hollywood's in a weakened state to begin with, and then ask, where are things going to be 3 years from now, let's say, with as a result of AI, it's a very gloomy picture. And I hate being the the Debbie Downer, as it were. But it is a very gloomy picture.
Well, already, Jonathan, anecdotally, I know somebody that's a fashion photographer who is being put out of business because his clients are now using AI models, these avatars that they create. Instead of hiring real models, they're using AI models, and they can put any kind of clothes on them that they want. So the models are being put out of business, and so are the photographers.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it makes the point also, though, that different creative fields pose different technological challenges. So the model, the photographer, I assume you're talking about, is still photography, photographs. That's not the same as a 2-hour movie. Neither is a 15-second video the same as a 2-hour movie. But people are being put out of work. I mean, I will acknowledge that 2.5 years ago, I did a kid's book where based on lyrics that I had written, I wrote the text, and I don't know how to illustrate. And it was a hobby project. So rather than spending $15,000 on illustration, which I just wouldn't have done it at all, it took me less than 8 hours using an earlier version of DALL-E and Chat GPT. And it hasn't sold many copies. It's a self-published book. But it certainly demonstrated to me that, that was a 30,000 to 1 cost ratio. It cost me less than $1 worth of a subscription versus $165. When you're talking that kind of cost ratio, you're talking about a technology that is inexorable and that is not going to stop. It's not the same as saying, well, we could save 10%, but the blowback would be too much, and let's debate it and let's see how we can, you're talking multiples in the hundreds and thousands to 1 ultimately of cost.
Right, and the only thing that's saving Hollywood is that most of what they're doing is what they call slop. But what's alarming about this Brad Pitt versus Tom Cruise video is that it looks pretty slick, and it's not slop.
It's not slop, but it's not 2 hours long. That's the other thing.
Right.
It's saving Hollywood for the moment. I mean, I would feel very confident that what you're going to see over the next year in the movie theaters and 2 years in the movie theaters is not going to be an AI generated, 2-hour movie. But am I confident, 3 years out and 4 years out and so forth? I mean, no, I'm not. I'm not confident at that point. The technology will develop, and the combination also of this technology with social media, meaning the stuff goes viral, and that you don't know, it goes viral before you can tell whether it was AI generated or not, has enormous implications, not just for Hollywood, but also, of course, for politics and cultural life and civic life generally. The video of this politician doing that to that politician, I saw it. It impressed itself in my memory, and it was only a day later that I learned that it was AI.
Right, and of course, just in closing, the economic implications are huge, and the Hollywood unions are the first to raise the alarm. But workers across the country and around the world will be put out of business by AI by the hundreds of thousands and millions, it would seem. So this is just the beginning of a possible nightmare. And I thank you for joining us, Jonathan Handel.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And again, I've been speaking with Jonathan Handel, who's a lawyer and journalist who practices transactional entertainment and technology law and was formerly a professor at UCLA School of Law and was a contributing editor for The Hollywood Reporter. He's a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and his most recent book is Entertainment Residuals, a full-color guide. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more light goes out.